My guest at this time is retired U.S. Navy Captain Chuck Nash. He's also a Fox News military analyst. We want to get his insights into the growing controversy over the fate of Jamal Khashoggi, the Saudi citizen and U.S. permanent resident who the Turkish government says was murdered in grisly fashion at the Saudi consulate in Istanbul. But while the media press for firm condemnation from President Trump, what are the competing entities and goals in this story? And what is the proper response for Trump, assuming the story of Khashoggi's murder is true? We'll discuss it all. And Chuck, thanks so much for being with us.
My pleasure, Greg.
It's certainly possible that Khashoggi was killed exactly the way we're hearing in the media from the Turkish officials. But for that to be true, it means taking the Turkish government explicitly at their word. Should we?
No, I don't think so. Just as we saw, and this is kind of an off-the-wall, if you will, analogy, but just as we saw with Brett Kavanaugh, you're innocent until proven guilty. That's Western law, that's Western thinking, and it's just the facts need to play out. We need to question them. There are so many competing agendas going on here that you can't take things at face value. You just can't. Facts matter, emotions don't.
What would the Turkish motivation be here? Do they have an interest in U.S.-Saudi relations heading south?
What they have an interest in is the Erdogan government, since he moved from prime minister to president and then basically had a putsch in Turkey, used a coup, whether that was real or not, but he used the coup to arrest tens of thousands of people, journalists, politicians, people who were deemed essentially enemies of the state. And he's taken over, and he's moving this more toward an Islamist government as opposed to what Mustafa Kemal Ataturk envisioned when he created the modern Turkish state. So this is a sea change inside of Turkey that normally the Turkish military would put down. I mean, Turkey's had multiple revolts, coups, led by the Turkish General Staff since Ataturk founded the modern state of Turkey. But now what's happened is, with this latest coup attempt, is what we're told, Erdogan has purged all of those who used to be seeing their job and their intent and their focus in life as being guarantors of the modern Turkish state. So as that moves more toward Islamist, you also see a power vacuum in the Middle East because of the contentious relationship between Saudi Arabia, Iran, and Turkey. So as Saudi Arabia, under the Crown Prince, Mohammed bin Salman, what he has been doing since he's taken the position has been to modernize and relax the very strict religious standards inside of Saudi Arabia. So he is loosening things, and he is running afoul of the Islamists, essentially. He's running afoul of them.
We're talking with Chuck Nash, retired U.S. Navy captain, Fox News military analyst. Let's go with the conventional story that we're hearing so far. Chuck, how does Mohammed bin Salman, the Crown Prince of Saudi Arabia, benefit from Khashoggi's death, if in fact it played out as him ordering this hit and these 15 henchmen carried it out at the consulate?
I don't see where he benefits at all. Khashoggi has written some things, but Khashoggi is more in line with trying to, according to his friends in the media, is more in line with bin Salman, which is trying to liberalize things, move more toward an open society with less of the hard religious control. So he has been critical of the Saudi royal family for not going far enough, fast enough. And so I just don't see where bin Salman wins in this at all. Now, bin Salman has a whole raft of enemies. not least of which are some of his own family members who you and your listeners may remember he had locked up in hotels in Saudi Arabia until he clawed back tens of billions of dollars from them. Not only that, but because of loosening the religious aspects, some of the religious aspects, giving women the right to drive, revamping the religious police, the Mataween, doing all of these things, meeting with Christian leaders and from around the world, doing all of these things, he has built himself up a whole raft of enemies. So he doesn't benefit, but his enemies would benefit if this were to be pinned on him, because that would have him removed from power, which is their principal aim.
Now, you mentioned he's got a raft of enemies, and some of those are obviously his own family members. As you mentioned, he locked them up until some financial arrangements were restored. He's got other enemies, too, I assume, beyond his family members as a result of his modernization efforts. Would they also have a problem specifically with Khashoggi?
No, but they could use Khashoggi. For example, in May of 2003, Khashoggi was fired from his job as the editor of one of Saudi Arabia's main dailies. He was fired because of pressure brought on by Wahhabi religious leaders, and Wahhabism is a very strong sect inside Islamic sect inside of Saudi Arabia. And in fact, when the state of Saudi Arabia was set up, it was done by essentially co-opting the Islamists, the Wahhabi Salafists, to back the royal family, and that relationship has been in place and has substantiated the royal family's position for decades and decades. Now, all of a sudden, you take a look at what Mohammed bin Salman is doing, and oh boy, you're unraveling that, and people on the other side of that equation are not going to be very happy.
Chuck, what more do we know about Khashoggi and how it might play into other folks wanting something very bad to happen with him, which clearly did? It's just a matter of who's responsible for it. We know he was a journalist, and that's where most of the coverage stops, but he did have an active role in other Middle Eastern affairs, it seems. Absolutely.
He was a boyhood friend of Osama bin Laden. And in fact, when bin Laden stood up al-Qaeda, he invited Khashoggi in so he could explain to him what he was doing. Khashoggi has also been involved with one of al-Qaeda's biggest financiers. He's visited Afghanistan back when bin Laden was resident there. And he's also been a player in the Muslim Brotherhood, to the point that there are some who consider him the head of the Saudi Brotherhood. So he is not simply a journalist. He's been doing a whole lot of things. And, you know, you have to be careful with this, because at the same time you have him being glorified in some circles. There are other agencies and other folks who are probably spreading information about him on the negative side. So again, listening to all of these different inputs, the listener beware.
Clearly. So if we can't take the Turkish government at their word, how do we actually investigate this and come to the most reasonable conclusion about exactly what happened and why?
This is going to be where the intelligence community comes in. We have sources and methods. Unfortunately, some of them have already been exposed early on in this controversial thing. But you've got CNN and the Washington Post already reporting that through intelligence sources that we were monitoring certain conversations of the very senior Saudi people. So the intelligence community is going to have to use their sources and methods to put together the best picture we can, and that's going to be very difficult because there seems to be intense pressure on the current administration, President Trump, to, well, what's the answer? What's the answer? Well, these things, when you think of all of the potential goings-on and who did what to who when, I mean, this could take a while to unravel. This is not going to be a really quick thing, and the Turks are, for some strange reason, completely unwilling to share their intelligence. And yet, this is all splashing out and playing out in the news media about fingers being cut off and him being, dismembered alive and all of this stuff. I don't know, Greg. Does it make sense to you and to your listeners? Why would you send, if you were going to put a hit on somebody, why would you send 15 people to do it? You know, I mean, you're just creating a witness pool that's staggering.
Yeah, that'd be a very long witness list. So what is the proper response if it is actually the way it's being reported, if that's what really happened? You've got some folks saying, like Lindsey Graham, who says, well, if this is true, then Mohammed bin Salman's got to go. I'm not sure exactly how the U.S. forces that, but we obviously do have some pressure points. Others say, look, this is horrible. This is grotesque. We have to make it clear that we will not tolerate this and they can never do this again. But we don't want to compromise the U.S.-Saudi relationship, particularly when they're a bulwark against the Iranians in the region. So if it's true, what's the right response?
I think the right response is the president to have a conversation with the king, and that MBS would have to go, and that would be kind of a precondition. And I think the king would be reluctantly in favor of making that move because he, too, does not want to jeopardize the relationship with the United States. So it's in his best interest to keep that relationship intact, especially, as you point out, with the growing and clear and present danger right across the Gulf in Iran.
Chuck, a lot of moving parts here, and something tells me we'll be learning more and more about this in the days and possibly even weeks ahead. Thank you very much for shedding a lot of important insights on the region, on the different players, and how it all potentially works together here. We greatly appreciate it.
My pleasure, Greg.
Chuck Nash, retired U.S. Navy captain, Fox News military analyst. I'm Greg Columbus reporting for Radio America.